Let's do it to it. Finally, Ezekiel chapter 47. The lesson everyone's been waiting for, because it's the last chapter of Ezekiel. Yay! Or not the last chapter, but the last study of Ezekiel. We still have another chapter to go, but that chapter, if you understand what we're about to talk about in this chapter, the division of the land, which carries through most of Ezekiel 48, will kind of make sense. So, we're going to take a look at Ezekiel chapter 47. We'll look at verses 1 through 12. So, it just looks thick. It's really not thick. That's a fig tree in your imagination. So, let's talk to our Elohim, and we'll take a look at something that not only applies to the exiles in Ezekiel's time and the people of the land in the millennium, but it's something that we need to also become aware of and start thinking about. So, Father, we thank you for this opportunity to study your word. We ask that you will open our eyes and open our ears and open our hearts so we can see, hear, and understand what your word tells us. And we thank you in the name of Yahushua. Amen. All right. So, we go backwards to Bereshis, and Hagar is kind of getting mistreated by Sarah. So Sarah runs her off, and the messenger of Elohim shows up and asks Hagar a very important question. And it's a question that we need to focus on and think about regularly. But he says, "Where are you going? Where have you been?" So there are questions, or these are questions that we have to consider, and questions that we might keep in mind as we consider the study of Ezekiel 47, 1 through 12. So keep also in mind that this message is to the exiles of Ezekiel's time. Okay? Ezekiel may not have had any kind of a concept or idea that he was giving a prophetic message for the future. He's speaking to the exiles, that he's trying to comfort them and say, hey, it's going to get better, you're going to have a bigger temple, you're going to have, everything's going to go back to the way it was. So, but we have to also consider that this is for the future to the people of the land in the millennium, and then it's also a message that we also need to think about and apply it to our own lives. So we start with verse 1. It says, "And he brought me back to the door of the house, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward. For the forefront of the house looked towards the east, and the waters came down from under, from the right side of the house, on the south of the altar." Okay, so there's enough information there that we can kind of maybe get an idea of what it might look like. But the question we have to ask is, what does it all mean? There has to be an application of this somewhere. So if we will consider that Yahushua said, "I am the door," and that Yahushua was the word of Yahuwah, that as the vessel that housed the Spirit of Yahuwah, then we can look at the door of the house, the temple, as being a representation of the word of Yahuwah himself. Okay? So this is the water that flows from the house, or the door of the house. The word for "and he brought me back" is Vaishiveni. Vaishiveni. I used to put little dashes in there, but I found that when I got to the end of a sentence, if I had a dash in there, it would split it up and it'd make it even harder to read. So I just muddle through trying to read it as best as I can. From the root shuv, roots are always easier, that means to turn around or to turn back to. Now, shuv is also the root of the word teshuva, meaning to repent and to turn away from transgression. So from the phrase, "and he brought me back to the door of the house," we can consider that there must be a turning away from transgression and a turning back to the word of Yahuwah. Now, in our study last week, or our last study of Ezekiel, we considered that within this millennial period, the people of the land are a people of a multitude of different beliefs. That there's an education or a re-education going on, that the prince is responsible for carrying out his duty as a restored whole Israel to teach the people, bring them back into Torah observance, and to reintroduce Yahuwah as their Elohim. So we consider this, that there has to be teshuvah. They have to turn away from the transgression of going after other deities or doctrines, and then they have to turn back to the word of Yahuwah. Would this be something that the exiles in Ezekiel's time would have to listen to? So yeah, you guys have made a mistake. You've strayed away from Elohim. You need to make teshuvah, and you need to come back to Yahuwah Elohim. This is what got you in this mess of being exiled in the first place. So, from the phrase, okay, we got that part. So, delivered to Yahuwah as a Nabi of Yahuwah. When I say Nabi, we're used to saying prophet. And when we say prophet, we get this idea of someone who tells the future. But a Nabi is a Hebrew word that means a human messenger, okay, where we have malakim that are the spiritual messengers that we call angels. But Ezekiel, Isaiah, all the 12 prophets are Nabi. They're physical messengers or human messengers. So as the Nabi of Yahuwah, we can see how this would have been a message delivered to the exiled children of Israel by Ezekiel. We can also see this as a message to be received by the people of the land in the millennium, especially in the light of last week's study, where we considered that in the millennium is a time of letting go of old dogma and a return to Torah observance. Okay? We all have questions, and we all stick to beliefs. In the millennium is when the truth is finally taught, and here you have the choice now to pursue the truth or to reject the truth. So, again, we need to get rid of this picture of the millennium as everybody's dressed in white clothes and laying on fluffy clouds and playing harps with little halos. The millennium serves a purpose. It needs to prepare the people of the land to enter fully and complete into the world to come. So, we can consider this idea as being restated in the phrase, "Behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward, for the forefront of the house looked towards the east." So the word of Yahuwah is the water that is flowing, and it moves eastward. This gives us an idea that the word of Yahuwah makes its way towards correcting any false beliefs that we may have picked up from Babylon. And we've all picked up false beliefs from Babylon. Okay? So, teshuvah, then, is the first step that opens the way for the water to flow. But it must flow from the door, the word of Yahuwah. The choice to make teshuvah and accept the word of Yahuwah, or not to make teshuvah and reject it, is found in the word for threshold, which is miftan. That from the root pethen means a serpent. Why do they get this idea of a threshold from this word that means serpent? Because their doors, they would actually put up something not only to keep the straw from going out, but it was also to keep pests from coming in. So, but this takes us back, that this word pethen means serpent, takes us back to the choice given in the letter tet. To submit to Elohim by and through his word, or not to. This again would have been just as relevant to the people in exile during Ezekiel's time as it is to the people of the land in the millennium. And it's also very relevant to us today. This is a choice that we have on a regular basis, more than once a day, as a matter of fact. We must also take into account that the waters issued out from under the threshold. So we have this word for under, which is mitzachat, that comes from the root toach, that means to be lowly, but it also means to be humble. So the exiles would have to humble themselves before Elohim, just as the people of the land will be required to do. And we can also consider that we, today, also need to humble ourselves before Elohim. We cannot approach Elohim with this proud, arrogant manner that sometimes we want to approach. But we also have to take into account that Yahuwah Elohim also humbled himself by forgiving, being rejected, and showing a willingness to restore the people who rejected him. So let's consider this from the Aramaic of Matthew 11:28 and 29. Yahushua is saying, "Come to me, all of you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am humble, and in my heart you shall find rest for your souls." So again, Elohim had to humble himself, forgive the transgression, forgive being rejected, forgive sin, and open a door of opportunity for people to say, oops, and make teshuvah, and take that yoke upon them, re-enter into the house. And we get this concept in this from this letter Het, that we write it in Hebrew. All letters are composed of other letters. Het, the ancient Proto-Sinaitic, is the wall of a tent. So Het as a word also means sin. So here's one of the choices is, do I remain hidden behind this wall of sin, or do I humble myself, recognize that I've been hiding behind this thing because my pride wouldn't allow me to do anything else, humble myself, make teshuvah, seek Elohim, and seek to yoke myself to him by and through his word. We have a Vav that represents humankind. The Zion represents the word that gives the protection, nourishment, and rest of Elohim. And it's connected by this yoke that happened to be called a huppah, that in a wedding ceremony represents the house. So we have to become a single house. But this requires both members of the marriage recognizing that they have to humble themselves, and both members of the marriage have to be willing to forgive one another and enter back into this relationship. So, verse 1 tells us that the waters came from the right side of the house. So the word from the right is Haimanit, from the root Yaman, that also means to choose the right. Now, Yamam can also mean the right hand. So the water flowed from the right side of the house on the south side of the altar. The word for altar is another one of them big old long ones. Lamizbeach, that comes from the root zabach, that also means an offering or a sacrifice. The word for south is Negev. Now, if we look at this from Ezekiel's point of view, Ezekiel, his vantage point would be a reference to the southern kingdom of Judah, a name that means to praise and to be grateful. So in this we can consider that the people of the land, as well as the exiles of Ezekiel's time, would not only have to humble themselves before Elohim, they would also have to offer him praise and gratitude. If the people of the land humble themselves and offer praise, then they continue in the condition of verse 2. And we get an idea of this again in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, where Yahuwah answering Solomon says, if my people will call upon my name and humble themselves and confess their sin, then I will hear them, and I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land. So this is about to come to fruition if the exiles will go through the steps that we've just considered. So verse 2. Verse 2. Are we in the right place? Yeah, verse 2. Then he brought me out by the way of the gate northward, and led me round by the way outside to the outer gate, by the way of the gate that looks towards the east, and behold, there trickled forth waters on the right side. Okay, so we've basically just read what we've just read, but from another vantage point. So the word for "and he brought me out" is Vayotzi eni, that from the root yatsa means to come out of. The word for way is derek, that also means a way of living or a mode of action. The word for gate is sha'ar, that from its origin means to think. Okay? Something about the very thoughts and the very mental processes have to change. The word for northward is safonah, that from the root safon means to be hidden. So it also means what is unknown, and it also means to be dark. So what we can consider from this phrase, then he brought me out by the way of the gate northward, is this idea. To come out of a way of life whose thoughts are based in unknown darkness. If we consider the exiles in Ezekiel's time, let's just read this. In this, we can consider that the reason that the children of Israel were in bondage, exile, is because they had entered into a way of life and a way of thinking that they had not known, and as a result were in darkness. They were in the darkness of exile. What is the thing that Yahusha tells the Samaritan woman? He says, you worship what you don't understand. You worship what you don't know. We worship what we know because this restoration comes from the Yahudim, but you have to have this relationship with Yahuwah Elohim based on His Word in order to understand why you believe what you believe. The Samaritan woman, why use a Samaritan woman? Someone that was never talked to, a people that were never talked to by the Jews, because they were considered, basically they were considered traitors, because they had worshipped in a different way that was not in alignment with the Torah. And this is where she says, you think that we have to worship in the temple, we think that we have to worship on the mountain. And then she makes this mention of, well, our father Yaakov dug this well, and he drank from this well, and his animals drank from this well. So a Samaritan is someone who has not followed the Torah, has gone about their own interpretation of it. The father of this person is Yaakov, that means to supplant, to remove one thing and replace it with something else. And that this is what they drank in order to be restored. Okay? So a people that are trusting in a false dogma are trusting in that dogma to bring them restoration. But as a result, what else drinks from that is the behemah drinks from that, and this is the cattle, that a cattle is a representation of spiritual poverty. So they're actually depending on a restoration to come based on false information, and it's building their spiritual poverty and their separation from Yahuwah Elohim. So they worship what's unknown or what's to be dark. So what we consider from the phrase, then he brought me out by way of the gate northward, is the idea to come out of a way of life whose thoughts are based in unknown darkness. In this we can consider that the reason that the children of Israel were in bondage and exile is because they had entered into a way of life and a way of thinking that they had not known, and as a result they were in the darkness of exile. So here Ezekiel is telling them that they must leave this way of life and thought behind by coming out of it. Do we hear this again somewhere? And in Revelation, Yahusha says, come out of her, my people. You know, he's referring to coming out of Babylon. So we can consider that this same message is to apply to the people of the land, and by proxy, it applies to us today. Why do you believe what you believe? What is the origin of that belief? To do this requires the humility that we considered in verse 1. This coming out of darkness is reflected in the phrase, and led me round by the way outside to the outer gate, by the way of the gate that looks towards the east. So without too much digging into it, we can consider that this dark lifestyle and thought is what leads to being outside of the gate and looking in the direction of Babylon, which is the east. So recognizing and becoming aware of sin is the first step in teshuvah. Once this occurs, the phrase, there trickled forth waters on the right side, begins to take effect. The word for trickled forth is mefakim, that means unstable. and that from the root pachaz means unimportant. The word used for from is, in this case, is min, that also means on account of, but also means from, as in being separated from something. So if we consider that the water is a representation of the word of Yahuwah, we can consider also that when the word is taken as unimportant, it becomes unstable in the form of dogma, and as such leads to a state of darkness. Okay? So, why do we believe what we believe? Do we support everything based on dogma, or do we support it based on the Torah? And I will say it, that a lot of times we use our knowledge of dogma to support new ideas in the Torah, or new ideas that come from the Torah. And we all do it, and it's something that we have to catch ourselves doing. So, something very important. Where were we? Okay. So the word is taken as unimportant. It becomes unstable in the form of dogma, and as such leads to a state of darkness. Worse yet, if we consider the right side to represent for us the compassion of Yahuwah Elohim, then even this is not seen in the darkness. Even the compassion and the mercy of Yahuwah becomes something that is irrelevant to us. The instability of dogma and false interpretation of the word of Yahuwah, which leads to a false sense of compassion and mercy of Yahuwah, must be removed from the lifestyle and the thoughts of not only the exiles of Ezekiel's time, but from the people of the land in the millennium, and again, by proxy, you and I. Okay? So this forces us to look at everything that we do. What is actually valid? What is actually not valid? Do I need to change something? Do I need to humble myself and make teshuvah? Okay? So where were we? The compassion and the mercy removed. Okay, so this cleaning process begins in verse 3. That says, when a man went forth eastward with a line in his hand, he measured 1,000 amma. Now, amma is a word you usually see as cubits. And he caused me to pass through the waters that were to the ankles. Okay. So we've considered that the word used for man is ish, and it's ish in this verse. It says, where's it at? Bitset ha'ish. So ish represents the physical act of worship. Let's consider the phrase, when a man went forth from eastward with a line in his hand. This phrase begins with beitzat, went forth, that from the root yatsa, again, means to come out of. So this provides us with an idea that worship must come out of. And he went forth eastward. Worship must come out of its connection to Babylon. To do this, he went forth eastward with a line in his hand. So we have this word for line, which is vekav, that refers to a line used for measuring in ancient times. So is it possible that Ezekiel is actually stealing a concept from the prophet Isaiah? So let's consider this a little further from Isaiah's point of view. And this is Isaiah 28, 9 through 13. And then we'll take a look at verse 17 to get a better idea of what this line is, or might be. Whom shall one teach knowledge? And whom shall one make to understand the message? Them that are weaned from the milk, and them that are drawn from the breast. For it is precept by precept, precept by precept, line by line, here a little, there a little. For with stammering lips and with a strange tongue shall it be spoken to this people. All right, so is this a true statement? Well, they're in exile. Why are they in exile? Because something with a stammering tongue and stammering lips has spoken to them and changed their understanding of what a relationship with Yahuwah Elohim is. People of the land, in the future, in the millennium, will they be in the same boat? Well, we have, We look at, I was reading about American Indians, that 30,000 years ago, between 30,000 years ago and 100,000 years ago, they say that certain tribes ended up in what we call Texas today. So if humankind has been making false assumptions and moving away from Elohim for even 20,000 years, even if we bring it to just the time of the Torah, which is about 4,000 years, is there going to have to be a period of time to review those thought processes and correct that dogma? Okay? So, to whom it was said, this is the rest, give you rest to the weary, and this is the refreshing, yet they would not hear. So, even though they were steeped in this dogmatic belief, and people were telling them, no, this is where you find your rest. This is where you have to come and enter into a relationship with Yahweh Elohim. This is refreshing, but they would not hear. Then it says, and so the word of Yahuwah is to them precept by precept, precept by precept, line by line, line by line. Here a little, there a little. And they may go and fall backwards and be broken and snared and taken. The Torah tells you, gives us instructions on how to build a relationship with Yahuwah, our Elohim, gives us instructions on how to love our neighbors as ourselves, tells us about Yahusha and the fact that there was something that was done that would restore us back to the Father, but yet we've created a whole bunch of, you hammer on a knife. It's interesting. I use that analogy. You hammer on the knife, you don't do anything to it, you just hammer on it. Scale is created on that steel blade. And if you continue to hammer on that hot steel blade with the scale on your anvil, that scale will actually dig itself into your blade. Then it's very, very difficult to grind that out. However, if you will do something that's totally crazy and put water on the surface of your anvil, and then take that hot piece of steel and hammer it on the water, that scale blows away. So, as human beings, we've simply been forging on an anvil that doesn't have any water on it. And what's happened? All of our belief systems, even in this room, have scale that is dug itself into what we're trying to create. We're the final product. So we have to go back to the water and understand that the water is the thing that we have to be able to ride on for that scale to come away. So something to think about. Wow, that was pretty cool. So now we go back to verse 17. Okay, so measurement of progress was to be dependent on the word of Yahuwah. Again, the way we hammer has to be dependent on the water there so that we can begin to remove the stuff that's stuck there. But the people fell into deception and false teaching, and through the word of Yahuwah would receive correction. So consider verse 17 of Isaiah that says, and I will make justice the line, and righteousness the plummet, and the hail shall sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters shall overflow the hiding place. So we've considered earlier that we get into a state of being hidden in the dark. The same thing that happened when Ish and Isha made this transgression. What they do, they hid. And then they covered themselves up with fig leaves. They made girdles of fig leaves in order to hide their transgression, and they wouldn't accept the fact that they transgressed. That was the sin. So taking from Isaiah and applying it to what we're considering in Ezekiel, we must take into consideration that part of the worship of both the exiles and the people of the land would be to review everything that they've come to believe, and then line by line, precept by precept, compare it to the word of Yahuwah. This kind of sort of what we do is when we come and we build that desire to have this relationship, we begin to examine why we believe what we believe, and we look at it in the Torah. line by line, precept by precept. And again, we look at a gospel that we don't read because it's a Gnostic gospel and it was banned. But Yahushua said, at first, you're going to be repulsed